boards had the same problem. I will go rustle up an audience.
Oh, don't worry about them.
Well, we need to know what's happening. I'm going to tell Greg to make an announcement.
Okay.
And he still loves the library.
Oh,
Yeah. And I love
Hello.
hi guys, how are you?
Good.
he and I have kind of that subtext in life of books that we shared, little things that we still say to each other, and I love that. I have that so much with the other two, but boy, especially when times were tight financially and it was way before digital.
Gosh, the library's your best friend.
Yeah.
Oh,
Always a treat.
indeed. So are you our teacher?
Yeah,
Speaker?
Yes.
teacher, speaker, I'm not really a teacher.
Well, I can listen and learn both.
Yes.
Good.
Linda, I'm Ann. Nice to meet you.
Ann, nice to meet you.
And you
And
are?
I'm Daryl Ann.
Darling,
Yes.
that's
Yeah,
nice.
Ann and Daryl Ann.
Yes.
That's nice, I like that. That's
Like a boy's name and a girl's name all at
put
once.
together.
Yes, and Ann was the one who told me about this event today, and I guess it's maybe the first time they've done it, so hopefully we'll pick up some steam with it. And
I think it's a great thing.
Yeah.
it's very doable.
Have you been part of the writers group?
Yes, the ACPW with David
Okay.
Winship. Yeah, and I've gotten to read here a couple times for when we've
What-
done our
that's-
poetry month.
Yes, I know that.
Yes.
But is there a writers group that meets besides that in this area?
I'm not aware of at the moment. There very well maybe. When
I don't
Norma
know.
Wilson Parker was in town, she used to do a Wednesday writers up at Heartwood, but she's not here at the moment, so I don't know. But we kind of do a little hiatus over the winter, and we're about to start up again next month. But
Well, that was, okay, on next door Glen Roki. Do you know what this is?
No.
It's a next door Westwood, next door, whatever. And you have to be in the neighborhood evidently to, like, people outside of the neighborhood evidently can't communicate. Like if you lived in Haswell, you couldn't.
Oh, you mean like a writers group that's just for people in the Glen Roki subdivision?
Well, no, because it seems to include people in Abington, is the
Oh,
point.
okay.
In other parts of Abington, but anyway, there may be one starting up.
Okay.
And the woman who mentioned it, maybe, they're both new to Abington. And if you're a newcomer, then you're asking about,
Yes.
you know, who do I get to asphalt my driveway?
Yeah.
Who do
Yeah,
I get to
get all of that,
form
yeah.
a writers
Connections,
group?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
here she is.
Oh,
Actually,
there.
hi. This is the lady that I was telling you about.
Hi, Daryl Ann. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Daryl. Nice to meet you as well.
I'm Ann, so it's easy. Ann and Daryl.
Ann and Daryl.
Yes, that is good. And let's see, I've forgotten your name already.
Hi.
Your first name is
I'm June.
June, who is the winner of the Creative Writing Day Award years ago.
Daryl Ann.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Well, now
she-
Ann.
name all at once.
So
she's
Ann
interested in
and
writing
Daryl,
poetry.
Makes it easy.
Punch it in. Maybe I can remember.
Yeah.
So if you could recruit Daryl Ann for your group,
Oh.
I think you would.
Well,
be very
I'm kind of a fledgling writer, but I'm very interested in just trying to do, try to grow. And
I think, you know what, I think we just need to do is start a sign up
I think we
sheet.
should.
And
Yeah, that
I would
great.
get together over
Interested
coffee
thing.
or something.
That would be great.
That'll make it contact information next year too.
Yes.
No, I
The
spent.
podium.
I
Okay.
Well, they probably have a sign-up sheet out there.
You want to
We might be able to just take pictures of
You are being broadcast out.
I didn't see it, I didn't see a sign up
Let me
sheet.
get it.
I'm just breaking
That's
it.
Daryl Ann.
Okay, so we should all go get a seat and I'll get the
Yeah,
link
that's
out there.
camera. That's
So
our TV out there.
Okay,
I saw
right,
that when I was out there.
on there, and I can write mine down on,
Okay, we're learning how this works.
Yeah.
Well, we thought that as people walk by, they would come in and see something was going on.
Yeah.
And then this is-
Are you gonna introduce too?
No.
And we'll, I guess we really should start, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Okay, so should I, y'all will get a seat.
Do you want Dare sit on the front seat?
I bet Linda would appreciate it
I
though.
would like that tremendously. Help yourself. I would hear, but, I mean, I'm worried, you know,
I
like,
understand.
the background noise bothers me, so.
Mary with an E. What is her name?
Sorry.
Like they say Merry Christmas, I love it.
Okay, this is a writers group that is getting together back here, by the way.
Right.
That's in mode.
Thank you. Perfect. All right, thank you.
Okay. We are happy to have Linda Hoagland, who has won acclaim for her mystery novels that include Snooping Can Be Doggone Deadly. And she is also the author of works of nonfiction and poetry. She has written over 30 books. She lives in Tazewell County.
Virginia.
Yeah,
Make sure
Tazewell,
you say
Virginia.
Virginia.
She's won numerous awards for her work, including first place for the Pearl Buck Award for Social Change and the Sherwood Anderson Short Story Contest. She has been president of the Appalachian Authors Guild, and she's going to share some techniques with us today. Thank you.
I really don't think I need this. I have a big mouth.
Okay, if you can't hear, you might move forward.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you have that problem. I do. My voice carries. I have a son whose name is Matthew, and every time he tried to whisper, it didn't work. It was all over the place, and I looked at him and I said, "You inherited that too, huh?" I don't whisper well either, but I have been writing. Actually, I've been writing all of my life, but life got in the way. So I didn't get anything published or even try to get anything published till I was 50. By the time I was 58, I had my first book published. And that's The Little Old Lady Next Door. That one was it's out of print now. That one is entirely, it doesn't take place in this area. It takes place in Cleveland, Ohio. I spent 25 years there as a young person and finally got out. So once I got out, I let it disappear in my back window. I did not want to go back. I lived in the inner city of Cleveland. You don't want to live there, okay? And that's what mainly is filled in this book. It is the truth of living in the inner city, in the inner part of a large city. So it sort of got lost on the wayside when I had it released here in the Bible Belt because they could not understand the things that were going on in there as real, and it was true. The whole thing is true. So I just sort of gave up on that and started writing mysteries. And I love to write mysteries. My first mystery was called An Awfully Lonely Place. It took place on my grandmother's farm in Russell County, okay? She had a farm that was sort of down in the valley, sort of hidden. You couldn't see anything going on there. You didn't know if anybody was alive or dead unless they were out there on a tractor or something. So I said that was the best place in the world to set up a mystery. So I knocked my uncle off. And I decided, I didn't like him. I got mad at him, and I said, "Okay, it's time for you to die, Uncle Jim." They found his body in the barn. Okay? So, of course, he died at the ripe old age of 80-something or other. But I had to change the name of the county from Russell to Richard County because I didn't want him to know I killed him. So I did. But it was fun. As I started writing, I found out you do this as you start to write. What mistakes you make. People point out your mistakes, okay? They will. It's like a flag waving. They're going to tell you, you got this wrong, you got that wrong. And I'm going, I wish I knew that when I got the first book published. But I don't know any of that stuff because I was new. And when I got my first book published, CreateSpace wasn't here. You had to find a publisher.
Mm-hmm.
That was not an easy task. I sent many, many manuscripts out in the mail and got them back and knew they had never looked at them because the pages were never turned. They were just, you knew that. And it was the formatted rejection letter, you know, they sent to everybody. So you knew they never looked at it. But they didn't recognize my name, so I wasn't going to be one that they would push. So I decided to start looking out on my own. So I went to Publish America and got that one. I had seen a poet on the local TV program there talking about how she got her poetry published at that place. And I said, okay, we'll give it a try. So I sent that. About 2 weeks later, they accepted it. I was shocked. I totally was. I had so many rejections. So when you start writing, you've got to remember people are not going to like everything you write. And they shouldn't. They have their own preferences. And I enter a lot of contests. People are not going to like a lot of my short stories either. I do not win all the time, but I do win a lot. And I may not be first place, but I don't care. Honorable mention is wonderful to me. You know, it's like first place to me. So I do keep trying, and I do recommend that you enter short story contests or any kind of writing contest, because that keeps you alert and it keeps you writing and it gets you into many different areas that you never thought of, because many of them give you a theme or a specific topic that they want you to write on. So if you pick a topic that you've never read before, you've got to go hunt it up and see what in the world they're talking about. And it's fun, and it keeps you interested in doing it. Also, I found out that there's a lot of course, when I started writing, there was no such thing as an internet. That tells you how old I am. So the internet has become a really big asset to writers. You can find anything you want on that computer. And if you start looking, you will be surprised at what is available. I never even thought about looking up certain things when it first came out, because I just didn't think it would be there. Then I started putting things in there that are way off the wall, okay? And I'm finding things on the internet about these stuff that I really? Is it there? Go to the internet if you get confused and you need help and you need research. Okay. How many of you ever thought of writing as a craft?
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
You're one of the few. Because most everybody don't think of it as a craft. I think of it as a craft. I think your finished product then becomes art in its own way. But it is a craft at the beginning, because you have to use your hands and your brain and everything else to get this down onto a piece of paper. So it does become a craft. And then once the finished product is presented, it is that fine piece of art, whether you like it or not. It is that fine piece of art that you created with your mind. There are people who refuse to accept writing as a craft. That's their own problem, not mine. Okay. How many of you have ever had anything published?
Self-published. Only by just because you do.
Self-published? That doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
published.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Now, you know, one of the worst things you can do when you start writing is to sit there and edit everything line for line when you first put it down on paper. Do you know why it becomes a problem? That's all you ever do then. You're going to be correcting and recorrecting the same paragraph and the same sentence, and you're never going to get your writing finished. So what you need to do is to get it all down, whether it's a jumbled up mess or not, just get it all down on that paper so that you can see. Now, personally, I write mine, and I mean I write it. It's going to be handwritten originally. Then I have to force myself to sit down and put it on the computer. I've worked with a computer all my life, so inputting information, so that's too much like work to me. But I do handwrite them, and I have this brain and hand connection. A lot of people don't have that. They gotta be sitting in front of that computer and writing. I just, not me. It's the finished product is gonna go into that computer. So I do, and I don't edit constantly. That's one of the things I don't like about writing on a computer, because it tells me every time I make a mistake. I don't want you to tell me. I don't want to go back and do it right then. I just, I want to keep going. Don't wave these flags at me. It interrupts my concentration. So watch your editing as you begin to write. You don't want to edit everything you write, because you'll never get it finished. You will just be there. That it will all be an unfinished manuscript. I have those too. Does anybody have unfinished manuscripts? Okay. Now, I know a lot of people are into fantasy and things like that really aren't part of this real world. It's in your brain. Most writers are told to write what they know. I write what I know. And boy, do I know a lot. So I write a lot. It's not that I am smart, it's just that I've lived a life that's a little different, and I know a lot of people. And the more people I meet, the happier I am, because you may be in my book someday. And I tell people that, because I will ask them if they have, like Daryl Ann, I like her name. That will be in one of my books eventually, because I like that name. I met a young lady whose name was Ariel, and I had told her I would put her in a book. And I did. It's in the one I'm writing now. So when she sees me again, I will tell her she is in there. Her name is so unique, so I wanted to put it in there. But I do write what I know. Many of my characters are people I know. Many of them don't recognize themselves, but that's good. Many of them, I wrote one about the school board office, and it was called Death by Computer. Took place at the school board office. I worked there for 23 years. There were two ladies in that office that I didn't like. They were determined to make my life miserable. So when I was writing this book, I killed them both. And I was very happy. And I would walk by and smile because I knew they were dead. It really was good for me. I don't know if anybody else, but it was really good for me to do that. Then I had the HR, the human resource person was there. She knew I was writing this book. She was determined I was going to make her a bad person in this book. I didn't. But she had to buy the book. And she went by and she picked out every character in that book. She knew them just as well as I did. And she's the only one I've ever known that could pick them all out, because they were all people I knew in that school board office. And it was so funny because, of course, it was fiction. Everybody says, well, so-and-so died. I said, it's fiction. Remember that. It's fiction. It's wishful thinking is what it was. Then you have to do a lot of research if you're writing nonfiction. Research can really drag things out forever. I have done a lot of nonfiction, but most of my nonfiction is not really the research type. It's the talk to somebody type. It's their biographical sketches. Okay, so if they're going to lie to me, then that's what I got. I got your lie right here, and everybody's going to read that. But if you're going to tell me the truth, I also put that in the book too. I prefer that you tell me all the truth, which means don't leave out the bad parts that you don't want to expose to the world. That's not your biography if you leave that out. So I do tell them. And then research, like I'm working on one now, you wouldn't believe the boxes of material I have had to read, copy, print, and I've still got to put the book together. And it's, yes.
Well, I've got a question about researching, because I get in this problem where I can go down the rabbit hole, and
yes.
all I'm doing is researching. How do you know when you find something if you should use it or not use it?
Depends on whether the person is living or dead, or if you're telling a true story. You can put it in there with limitations. I mean, you don't want to make somebody look really bad if they weren't. Okay, if they were just part of the story, you just want to make sure that that is all it is. They are just part of that story. Like I'm writing about the Claypool Hill murders, the Pizza Plus murders that took place about 10 years ago. I think it's about 10 years ago.
I remember that.
I have all of the sheriff's research on it. He gave me a hub filled with all the information, videos, everything. And I have printed everything out that I could print out in paper. I have filled up 2 boxes so far. And that's not getting into the videos and audio recordings. And then I also have the Virginia State Police information. So that's a lot of research and that's a lot of reading. But it's still going to be the same story. It's going to cover 4 years, and that's how I'm going to break it down into 4 years. The 2009 it happened. 2010, 11, and 12 basically were trying to figure out who did it. 2013 is the trial. So I've got to cover all of that, and that's how I'm going to break it down with those years. And people were assuming at that time that nothing was being done by the sheriff because there wasn't anything in the newspaper. You know, it's just, they couldn't tell anything because they were still researching it. They were still trying to pin that killer down. Until they finally got to where the only one it could have been was the son. So they did manage to get that, and they got his confession. So, but it took them 4 years to do it. And it's not that they didn't work on it. I can prove they worked on it. It was just getting that confession was what they needed. And they couldn't prove he did it without the confession. So it's hard to rationalize if you were one of those people working on that murder, saying, well, we're working on it. Well, we don't see any results. No, you don't, and you won't until the end.
Well, now,
So-
how do you get permission to use that? Is that part of Freedom of Information Act that you can go in?
Yeah, freedom of information. Actually, he came to me and asked me if I'd write it.
Oh, nice.
The sheriff did.
Mhm.
And I looked at him, yeah, sure, right. And I didn't know what I was getting into at that point in time. But yeah, I will write it, and it's the Freedom of Information Act, because everything that he has is available to the public.
Okay.
I got the redacted version, and you would too if you wanted it.
Is this going to be then nonfiction?
That will be nonfiction, yeah. And that will have real names and real people in it, okay? So a lot of research you can go down that rabbit hole with that research, you really can, but then you've got to stop. Eventually you have to stop or you'll never finish looking it up. So if you want to write a book and you've done a lot of research, you've got to figure out where you want to put a halt to it. Because many, many different things can take you down those rabbit holes and you'll never get it done. Okay, now, I am a very unstructured person except for when I'm doing nonfiction. Nonfiction, you have to follow chronologically in most cases what's there, okay? In fiction, you don't have to do that. You have this little freedom of imagination that lets you to do anything you want to do at any time you want to do. But you've got to keep it to the point where you don't lose your interest of the person who's reading the book. And that's a struggle with fiction writers, is they have a wonderful beginning, a great ending, and all that in the middle is boring as heck. So you've got to make sure it's keep going all the time. You've got to have something, some kind of activity, some kind of suspense, something going all the way through it. And that's hard sometimes, trying to figure out how you can do that. But structure is an important part of nonfiction. It's not so much in fiction. Because your characters basically lead you through the fiction. You want to get from the beginning to the end, but you want to work on your middle quite a bit, okay? Okay, your choice of words. I'm using a chart here that I'd gotten off the internet. It's one of the best ones I've seen on writing. You use strong verbs and nouns. Strong verbs, you want to make sure she ran down the hall. Well, ran down the hall doesn't mean a whole lot to me. You have to make it she hurried down the hall. You have to get that interest, you keep that interest going with those words. Your choice of words can really bore people. I tend to be conversational, okay? If I'm gonna write something, it's gonna be like I'm talking to you. I don't add a lot of $50 words, and I don't want the dictionary right there beside you, because I don't use those words, and I don't want you to have to look them up. I've ran into a couple of them I couldn't even figure out myself, so. So you have to worry about the words you use, but again, mine's conversational, so mine would be more of your ordinary everyday words. And your adverbs, they always tell you not to use many adverbs. Don't use the ly words. I use them anyway. I use adjectives too, because you do that when you speak. And like I said, I'm a conversational writer, so I'm going to use those words. And I don't care if you want to correct me or not, I will use those words because that's the way I speak, and that's the way you and I would speak, okay? Of course, you have to use correct punctuation and correct spelling, and your punctuation now is different from where I learned it. And I've had more arguments over commas.
Yeah.
Really, I have. And now I'm having an argument over the fact that you can start a sentence with and or but. Shoot, that was a no-no when I was a kid. You never did that. They do now. So the commas can create a problem for you, than they do for me. Okay.
Well, do you have a go-to guide for things like that? I know that some people use like Chicago Manual style, some use the
Yeah,
AP
that's the
Manual.
recommended one to use.
Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago. And it is good, but again, it's more of a professional type writing. I don't do that. I just do fun writing, okay? So I don't use the Chicago Manual that much. If I have a question, I'll go to it, use it. Or I'll just go to my computer and look it up. But, and let me see, work details. Everybody, how do you work? Do you write every day? Come on, everybody, tell me, do you write every day?
No.
No.
I don't write every day. That's what they recommend, that you have a certain time every day to write. Hey, come on, we live, we have a life. There's no way we can do that. I can't do that, and I don't want to do that. If I am forced to sit down there and write at this certain time every day, I'll stare at that piece of paper. I will not get anything on that piece of paper. And many times they tell you to free write. If you've run into a problem with coming up with something to write, you free write. You just write anything that's going in your brain. You don't want to know what's going in my brain. And I'm not going to put it on paper. They're going to haul me away. So I don't do that either, but I will write, and usually it is my choice when I write. If I'm going to write, and strangely enough, I write better under a deadline. If I give myself a deadline, I know I have to have something complete. I'll get it done. But that's the only way I'm going to get it done. I have to give myself a deadline. So like with the books that I'm writing now, I said by the end of summer I will have it done. Well, I've changed that. It was by the end of spring. Now it's the end of summer. Before I die, it's going to be the next one. Okay?
I think so, yeah.
And always write your books in the active voice. Like it is happening now. It's not that it happened last week. You are enduring the pain and the struggle and the torture and all of this stuff right now. And dialogue, use dialogue. That'll tell you. That'll tell people what you're thinking and what you want your characters to think. Use a lot of dialogue because it opens up the book. It gets them people interested in knowing your characters. I have some weird characters. I like them. Oh, And please, show, don't tell. Do you know what that means? I've had many people try to tell me what show, don't tell means. What does that mean? Anybody tell me?
Well, what I always thought it meant was if you're having a scene, you play it out in front of the reader instead of having exposition saying, here's what
Right,
happened.
you're gonna, instead of a narrative,
Yes.
okay. Yeah, you're right about that. You need to show your reader, using your characters, everything that's going on in that scene. Don't tell them, don't tell that story after the fact or before it happens. You need to show them, you need to show that interaction. You need to keep people interested in what you're reading by using that dialogue. That show, don't tell is a very important aspect of it, and I teach a lot of older students at Southwest Virginia Community College how to write now. And it's a volunteer thing, so don't think I'm getting paid for this, folks, it's not. But I enjoy doing it, and I keep doing it. I started at the College for Older Adults doing it. It's hard to get them to, they tell beautiful stories, they write beautiful stories, but they're telling it after the fact. What I want them to do is to tell me as the story happens. Don't tell me the story after it happens. Give me a reason to keep on reading. If it's after it's happened, I may not be interested in reading the rest of it. So I want it to be active, to be real. Anybody got any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking, my dad writes a little, I mean, just for us as family. And that makes so much sense with what you're saying about, I want him to tell me, instead of looking back of when he was a boy, I want him to tell me when he was a boy.
Yeah.
I want him to tell me when he was milking the cows, what it was like to be that boy milking the cows, not as an 85-year-old man thinking back on his memory, and that makes so much sense. I just thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. You need to keep people interested, you need to have them with you, right
Yeah,
there.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was in a critique group in Williamsburg where I used to live, and there was a lady writing about colonial Williamsburg, and that's where her story was. Well, she got the show and tell thing down, but her issue was she would have her hero walk into his house and sit down at the table and tell another character the action. So instead of showing us the actual action of him coming home and somebody in the stockades and all this, the scene was him walking in and telling his wife, well, I walked down the road and there was a guy in stockades, and and it was like, no, let the reader see him in the road and encountering the stockades. Did this guy smell because he'd been there for so long? Was the road muddy? Those kind of things, instead of sitting around the table talking, characters talking to each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exactly the problem there. A lot of people will tell you the story after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to get you involved in when it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, anybody else got any more questions?
Linda, who are some writers that you like and read and inspire you in your writing?
Well, I just finished 20 books, and I can tell you there's none of them in that one. Okay. I am a judge for a national writing contest for general fiction. Okay. And I had to pick 3 of the best ones, and I was really struggling with that. Okay, so I did pick out 3 good ones, and sent that in as the, I don't know if they will win, but I picked those 3 because I have hundreds of judges. And my favorite writer now is, I've got 2 new ones at home that I haven't read, and I'm mad at myself because I had to read those other ones, is Dean Koontz, whom I love, and James Patterson. I liked James Patterson when James Patterson was writing the books, okay? Now he's not. Do you know how he gets his writers? He has a master class group on the internet, okay? You can become a James Patterson co-writer if you do well in his class. That's how he's gotten all of these different co-writers. They write the book. He just puts his name on it. That's why you put so many of them out. And of course, if you go from book to book, you'll find out the characters, the style, and everything is completely different in each book because it's different writers. But I would like to have the money he makes. Oh gosh.
You wonder if the co-writers are getting paid.
They don't get
adequately.
nearly as much, no.
Yeah.
But they are getting the recognition.
Recognition, sure.
That's all they want, and that's all I would want, is that recognition that I actually co-wrote that book with James Patterson. Actually, they wrote it, so, but, and James Patterson he will read it, and then he will change he tells the writer to change what he doesn't like, and then that's the finished product. So he really doesn't write these anymore.
So he's acting like a producer.
Yes, he is.
Wow.
I was very disappointed when I was younger. I used to read strange books by V.C. Andrews. Now, I don't know if any of you recognize the name. V.C. Andrews did really odd books about children, and I liked it. It was a style that I really liked. And then all of a sudden, the next group, that was one series, and the next series started, and it wasn't the same. The writing wasn't the same. You knew it wasn't the same writer. Okay. I did some digging and found out that V.C. Andrews had passed on, and they were using her notes. She had left volumes of notes for the next series. So they were using her notes and ghostwriting her books. Well, that's a big disappointment because it's not the same. I enjoyed V.C. Andrews. I did not enjoy the ghostwriters. And her foundation paid those writers, so I'm sure they got good money out of that one. But it's the same. When they start doing that, I sort of get away from it. You know, I'm not real interested in doing it anymore. Now, the one with James Patterson and Bill Clinton, I wonder who wrote the lion's share of that one. I haven't read it, but I really wonder who wrote that one. I really do. Because, yeah, because they were together with it, and I'm sure he had to do most of it, and Bill Clinton had to give him the inside information that was used in it. But you wonder about some of those things, about the writers.
Well, now, Linda, you write a lot of different types of books.
Yeah.
Do you use the same voice throughout? So if I read a Linda Hoagland mystery and then looked at the nonfiction, would I realize it was the same writer?
Yes, you would. My voice doesn't change. Like I said, I'm a conversational writer. You're going to find that all the way through it. You're going to find that in the new one too, because I want you to be interested enough to read it. And if I'm talking to you, maybe you will read it. You know, maybe you'll pick it up and go beyond the cover. A lot of people don't. They'll pick it up and look at the front cover. This is my new one. It has I always thought that was a strange cover. But it has a strange cover on it, and it is a mystery. And I want you to pick it up and read the back of it, so you'll get an idea of what's in this book. This is about a 70-year-old lady. Most of us fit into there. You don't.
Put your finger over here, too.
This is about a 70-year-old lady who's suddenly discovered that an old boyfriend that she had a crush on in high school, now she's 70 now, is standing in front of her. And all of a sudden he's getting friendly. He wasn't friendly in high school. Why are you doing this now? You have to read the book to find out if that's good or bad. But that's my new one. And I've enjoyed writing that one. It was fun because I really had the guy in mind that I had a crush on in high school when I wrote it. And I'm sure he wouldn't do anything awful like this one. So, but you pick up things. When you're a writer, you pick up things in your life, and they get in your book. Somehow they get in there. You didn't intentionally want to put them in there in most cases, but somehow it's there. Almost every book I have written, I have had some part of my life in there. And it's not that it was an intentional thing, it's just that happened in my life, so it's going to go in that book. I do that a lot. And writers will do that. They won't admit it, but they will do that. Because you write what you know. know, and that's what I know.
Well, I have a question. With a lot of projects, how do you know if you come to a wall? How do you know to scrap the project, to move on to something else, or really barrel through? I mean, how do you know the project's going to be finished?
If I haven't picked it up and thrown it out the window, I will finish it. And I have done that. I have a couple of them that I went back to years later and finished them. Because somehow I just could not get my brain to follow that path of those characters. You have to be able to follow your characters. And if that character has suddenly become dumbstruck, it's not going to help you. So you've got to wait till that character gets smart again and go on. But yeah, you do that. You have to just stop, put it aside. I have them all on the thumb drives, okay? If I need to go back to it, I'll pull it out and look at it. Not in the mood for that one today, and I'll set it aside and work on something else. I do a lot of short stories. That keeps me from getting back to that one that I haven't done. I need something to keep me from doing that one if it's not working out. I don't want to force a book. You have to, you don't, because a reader can tell when you forced it. You forced it beyond this point, and it just doesn't seem to mesh quite properly. So yeah, you need to do that. Just set it aside and go back to it. Just don't get rid of it, but go back to it later. I do that with poetry too. I was never a poet, and at least I never called myself a poet. I started writing poetry when it was rhyming. You did everything rhyming, okay? They tell you not to force the rhymes. Well, sometimes that's the only way you can get it to rhyme. You gotta force it, okay? Then it went to, now it's freestyle basically, prose poetry. I'll tell you my secret, but I don't want you to tell anybody else. I write a lot of little tiny flash fiction. I have one that I enter the contest every month, and it's the 53-word flash fiction story. That's all you can use. You can use no more, and you can't use any less. It's exactly 53 words. I will convert those into poetry, basically word for word. I will break it down into syllables, and I have been published many times doing that little trick. And people will wonder, well, when did you start writing poetry? As soon as I finished that flash fiction, and it didn't do any good. So I went. But I like to do that. And it's fun, and in the past, you know, it was the rhyming poetry. The rhyming poetry was fun too, and eventually that will come back into style, and it's coming now. I've seen several things coming out with the rhyming poetry. But again, it's a forced thing. You have to, the words sometimes can look obviously put in there only because they're rhymed. And of course, I do the short stories, the poetry, the true stories, and the mysteries. I think I've got it all covered. Anybody have any questions on all of it?
I came in late, so if you've already talked about this, to say you missed out. But I'm just curious about your beginnings as a writer and how you got started. And
when I was a kid, I went to a country school in Southern Ohio. It's where my dad's house was, and then we ended up in Cleveland. God bless Cleveland. But in Southern Ohio, it was Portsmouth, Ohio. I lived in a small town called Twin Valley. We went to a rural school in Scioto County. And we would go to the library, and the library was within the school. You couldn't take anything out. You had to read everything in the library because they didn't trust any of us. And I always wanted my name on one of those spines of a book in a library. The only way that was going to happen is if I wrote a book. So I kept that in my mind from when I was in elementary school, that I wanted to do that. Then when I got older, I still wanted to do that, but I had a husband and 2 kids and a job, and nothing else would let me get anything done. Till I reached the age of 50, and I said, if I don't write that book now, it's never going to be written. So I did. and I got it written, and I was very proud of the fact that I did. And I was married to a man at the time who was very proud of the fact that I did. Now that is an important thing. If your husband doesn't like what you're doing, it can affect you. Mine did. Well, I can tell you, I've been married 3 times. 3rd time I got it right. 3rd time. We were married 25 years, and then the only reason we aren't married now is because he died. So, the father of my sons, my first husband, his father told me I would never, ever get anything published. That kept me going, guys. That kept me going. I kept writing. I didn't do anything with it, but I kept writing. Then my second husband was a real sweetheart. He had 2 kids the same age as my 2 kids. He had 2 girls and I had 2 boys. They fought from daylight to dark. Honest to God, they never stopped fighting. So about 6 months after that, I was working for a lawyer. I went into work and typed out the dissolution. And I said, sign it. We're getting out of this one. So at the end of that one, he said, well, why? He's a wonderful man. He said, well, why? And I said, because I can't stand the fighting. And I really couldn't, and I didn't want to be part of it. So I was divorced again. Terribly disgraceful thing. Okay. So I met my 3rd husband, working for that same lawyer. He came in to get a divorce from his wife. Okay. He was a nice guy. I couldn't figure out why she wanted to toss him out, you know. So about a year later, we got married, and I was very happy about that because he thought that the fact that I was writing was one of the best things in the world. And he would go with me to different events. He would set up with me. He had a bad heart, so I had to keep it within a certain limit. My radius could not go too far out because I didn't want him to be overly exhausted. So I really appreciated the fact that he was my helper. And he's been dead for 10 years, and I'm still mad at him. He shouldn't have died. I miss my helper. So yeah, it's you need that support. You need that family support. Now my dad, would never. My mom, they never even thought about the fact that I could write. Okay, and my kids, I don't think they have ever read anything I've written. I've got 2 boys, and they're now. Michael is 48 today, and Matthew will be 46 next month. If Matthew's read any of it, I don't know about it. He gets a copy of everything I write, but I don't know that he's read it. I know Michael hasn't. So someday, they might read it and be surprised. But I did have the support from my husband, so I was very lucky about that. Now, any more questions?
You mentioned when you were, one of the books that you wrote had characters from the school board.
Mm-hmm.
Did any of those people recognize themselves in the book?
Most of them didn't bother to buy the book.
Okay.
Okay.
Have you had negative responses of people that did recognize?
No.
Okay, so how are you shaping your characters so that you're inspired by real people, but they're being shaped to be different?
I go on the premise that it is fiction. I may use you in my book, but you've got to remember that it's fiction. That doesn't mean that if I claim that you murdered somebody, that you actually did it. You know, that just means that you are a character I used, and I liked you, so I wanted to put you in that book. In most cases, if I like you, you're not the killer.
Well, I hope so. I mean, do you take like gestures that people use, like this, or the way somebody's eyes look, and?
Yeah, I have a friend of mine who absolutely will go up to you and rub the top of your head. Doesn't matter how you've got your hair, what you're looking like. You don't want the top of your head rubbed, right? I'm not a dog. So I put that in a book, and he knows it. And I don't care.
It's not Joe Biden, is it?
But his first name is Joe. No, and I've been very fortunate to know a lot of different writers, and we're all different characters, and believe me, we're all strange. Yes.
No, I was just gonna say, do you ever work with a response partner? So you write and then try it out with somebody else before?
No, never did.
Solo completely?
Solo completely. Well, I never really had anybody around me who would be interested enough to do it. And because I live in Tazewell. There are no readers in Tazewell. I have one fan. She has all of my books, and she's the only one who reads them. But I live in Tazewell, so they're not going to volunteer to do anything like that. And I've tried the library, and that didn't work either.
Talk a little bit about what the Appalachian Writers Guild does.
The Appalachian Writers Guild is a group of writers. We are all together with the idea that we're trying to teach each other something that we don't know, okay? There's a lot of things I don't know, and a lot of you can teach me a lot of new things, okay? But it's a compilation of people, congregation, getting together and trying to help each other. Now, we do have workshops. The workshops are quite good in many cases. Some are a little tedious. If you've done the work, you know that you know, it's hard to sit there and listen to it over and over again, but you do anyway, out of respect for that writer. I do a lot of them on writing prompts because a lot of people don't use writing prompts. Do you know what a writing prompt is?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't think of a thing to write, if your mind has gone completely to jello, look up writing prompts. You will find that there are hundreds and thousands of them that will inspire you to write something. And writing prompts have done a lot of my writing for me, in short stories especially. If I can't think of anything to write, I will look up a writing prompt. And oh, gee, that looks good. Maybe I can go from there. You use that sentence and just go on from there. I use a website called The First Line. They will give you the first line of the short story. You have to use that first line. You cannot change it in any way, shape, or form, except maybe put quotation marks around it, okay? You use that as your inspiration and you go from there. And I do a lot of writing with those because it gets me started. I needed to be jump started that day, and that got me going. So those are good short story inspirations. And you don't have to send it into that contest. You can use it on something else. But I suggest that you enter the contest because the more you enter, the more you write it. And I do a lot of free ones now because I have found that money doesn't grow on trees like I was told when I was younger. So I sort of, and some of those contests are quite expensive to enter. And it's just not worth it because you're competing with thousands of people.
When you start your writing, do you typically flow along with the story, or do you find yourself at times starting in the center and then building around it?
I start at the beginning. I really do. I may know where I want, what I want in the center and the end, but I will start almost everything at the beginning because I want that beginning to lead me where I want it to go.
You're letting it take you.
Yeah, it's taking me. I want to be free and spontaneous that way. I don't want it to be structured or contrived. A lot of people want complete listing of what they're going to put in their book or their short story. It's like an outline that if I am held to that outline, I'll never get it written because I don't want to follow an outline. I want to make my characters alive. And they're not going to do whatever that outline tells me they should do, you know. So I do stray from that. I am more of a freestyle type. The phrase I heard recently was a plotter. A plotter is one who just follows that structure. Or a pantser, which they fly by the seat of their pants. I'm a pantser. And I enjoy being a pantser. Except in nonfiction. You can't do that in nonfiction. But in fiction you can. Any more questions?
Thank you all very much.
Just a quick announcement, at 1 o'clock is the publishers panel. So we'll have 3 publishers in here talking about how to get your books in print.
Here you guys, this is what I was following.
This is
You're welcome.
Yeah. Cause we can go yes. You want to just run the deck? Sure. My niece works on it now. She works on the Scholastic. But I asked her.